As I mentioned before the break, President Trump loves uncritical support from black people, but continues to ignore the inequalities that threaten black life. He was quick to publicize rapper Kanye West's endorsement of him last week, but he said nothing about the courage of James Shaw Jr., the black Tennessee man who disarmed the suspect in the mass shooting at a Tennessee Waffle House last month. And despite his Justice Department insisting that embattled police departments suffer under reform agreements, he has not commented on the controversial arrest of Shakisha Clemens at an Alabama Waffle House last month, or the 2 African-American men arrested at a Philadelphia Starbucks last month, just minutes after arriving, or the coroner's report released this week that shows that unarmed black man Stephon Clark was shot 3 times in the back by Sacramento, California police. As I've said before, black America still cannot count on this White House to recognize grief or greatness, unless, of course, you're a friendly rapper. Joining me now is Tiffany Cross, managing editor of The Beat DC, and Jason Johnson, politics editor for TheRoot.com and an MSNBC contributor. Tiffany, you cover in TheBeatDC.com a lot of what's going on the Hill. In fact, you do my radio show with me on Tuesdays, telling black American radio listeners about what's going on in the Senate and the Congress that relates to their communities. And one of the things that you and I have talked about is no matter whether it was Stephon Clark in Sacramento or the case of Clemens now in Mobile, Alabama, which I've been involved in both, let me be in full disclosure, or other situations of race, Starbucks in Philadelphia, there's been radio silence from this administration, not one word. And when you have an unarmed black man disarm a man that had an AR-15 shooting and killing 4 people in a Waffle House in Tennessee, this president doesn't even tweet about the heroic deed. Is this clearly a race signal from this White House?
Obviously, yes, I think it is a race signal, but I also think in the case of James Shaw Jr., there's no way this White House wants to comment because it runs contrary to every message they're trying to put out there around guns. And their message is more guns make people safe. And James Shaw Jr. has proven that not to be the case. He was able to disarm this man with no guns and save lives in the process. So I'm not surprised that the White House has not commented on that. But I would say, though, about some of the shootings that happened around the country, this does show a stark contrast between how the press treated President Obama, who was required to weigh in on every issue relating to race, particularly around shootings, and how the press treats this administration in the press room with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So when journalists have asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders to weigh in on the different cases around the country, her response has been, oh, well, this is a local issue. We're staying out of it. Well, that's not exactly consistent with this administration's stance on marijuana legislation, for example. So it really is yet another contradiction that we see in the administration, and I would challenge some of the press corps in that room to press on some of these issues, because we consistently hear from her, this is not what the American people care about. Well, I'm an American, and these are issues I care about. When I go to my book club or go to the hair salon or at the grocery store or talk to my family, these are things that we talk about. So it really is a way that they view America in this very myopic lens and dismiss some of these highly publicized cases and conversations that are happening all across the country. So they don't have their finger on the pulse of the community and what we're talking about.
Well, Jason, when I hear them saying it's a local issue, and I think that Tiffany is right to raise that they don't say that about other issues like the marijuana laws. But I also hear them reverting back to the old states' rights argument. Let's decide this state by state, whether it was voting or even going back to slavery. And that is frightening for those of us that understand American history, if our rights or the protection of our rights are now reduced back to a state-by-state basis.
Well, yeah, Rev. I mean, look, it's not like we're going to get any assistance from Jeff Sessions in this Department of Justice. But let's be clear. Donald Trump doesn't care. I mean, you know, to quote pre-sunken place Kanye, Donald Trump doesn't care about black people, right? He never has. He has only liked black people there as props for whatever it is that he wants to do. This is a president that will talk about terrorism in France. He'll talk about guns in France. He'll talk about gun issues in England, but he will not talk about issues here. He won't talk about the laws associated with issues here. I'll even go further. Even when you think of the things that the president supposedly cares about, like our soldiers and our troops, he didn't say anything about Richard Collins. That's a young college student who was about to be in the military, who was killed. It's 10 miles from here. So, look, the idea that the president of the United States picks and chooses what he's concerned about, only focuses on those issues that matter to him and a very, very small, narrow constituency is not surprising. It is race-based. It always has been with this presidency, and I'm not surprised. I think anyone who's expecting him to show empathy for anyone other than white Americans who are convenient for him in a certain polling segment is going to be sorely disappointed.
You know, Tiffany, you cover a lot about what the Congressional Black Caucus is doing. And I know the chair of the caucus, Cedric Richmond, has come with some very firm positions and legislation. I know they're dealing with mass incarceration. Civil rights groups are involved. As I said, some of the incidents the last 2 weeks, I've gone from Tallahassee to Mobile and all on these issues for National Action Network. You had a lot of the public, what are the civil rights groups doing? What are the Congressional Black Caucuses doing? And I think people don't understand we're flying against the face of an administration that is not like the last one, that wants to suck all the air out of the room so these issues won't be heard, which means we have to double down.
This is a question I get all the time when I'm across the country. People ask consistently, what is the Tri-Caucus doing, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus doing, the Congressional Black Caucus doing, the Asian American Caucus doing? And there's actually a lot of resistance taking place in the Hill, but what people have to remember is this is a Republican-controlled Congress. So there's consistently bills introduced, but they fall flat because Democrats are not in control. So, for example, the Congressional Black Caucus, they're holding a Twitter town hall on some of the police brutality cases. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries from your neck of the woods, Rev, he's working with Republicans on the prison reform legislation that, of course, got caught up in the gridlock of Congress and wasn't able to move. But he was actually working with President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. So there are bills being introduced, and I would say that this is a way that Republicans can work with Democrats. Republicans who claim to support small government, they should want to work on things like prison reform and address things like mass incarceration. This is a drain on the country's resources. And we're seeing some of these things happen where we can agree this is work that can move forward, but there's so much gridlock, and Congress has moved to a more tribal space where people, just on the basis, as we've seen during the Obama administration, are refusing to cross the aisle and work to get anything done. And so, unfortunately, a lot of this resistance cannot move out of Congress.
Jason, can the Democrats therefore find a way to energize and mobilize their base, including out a real coming to terms, really, with the need for a major turnout among black voters? I mean, in this kind of reactionary phase that we're going through in American politics, are Democrats doing enough to really say, you've got to come out and we will address your issues, and we're not afraid to deal with the race gap in this country?
Of course not, Rev. The Democrats almost never get that right. I mean, look, they're always behind. Now, look, thank goodness there appears to be the discussion. The Democratic Party seems to have moved beyond, we've got to convince working class white voters, which was, you know, sort of code speech for Trump for the last 18 months. But no, the Democrats are still having difficulty. We saw that in Virginia. We see that in some of the primary discussions happening in Georgia. We see that with the primary happening in Ohio. You still have a tremendous amount of concern and anxiety in some segments of the Democratic Party about putting black candidates and black women in particular on tickets, which is what's going to drive turnout. But here's the thing. I don't think it's going to matter. I think that Democrats are probably going to do well this fall despite themselves. But the most important thing, Rev, and I think this is what people have to understand. Yes, it's great if there's some magical blue wave. Yes, it's great if it's in the House and Senate, but it's the state races that matter.
That's
it's
right.
flipping your state house, your state senate, your county prosecutor. They're the ones who are affecting voting laws. They're the ones who are picking the county prosecutors. And if we get involved at that level, it doesn't matter what they say up in the DCC, we'll get some changes done on the state.
Well, the state houses are important because right behind the midterm elections and the presidential elections is the census, and it's the state legislators that will take those census counts and decide the districts lines, and there's where gerrymandering goes in, and that's where we know where the next decade of American politics and legislation will go. Thank you very much, Tiffany Cross and Jason Johnson.
Thanks,
Up
Brad.
next.